Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us for our webinar on a three-step process for accelerating customer success. We're excited to share with you our proven process for helping SaaS buyers adopt and experience the value and business results they hope to achieve with software. So, for those of you who are new to Tritons, a brief description of who we are and what we do is we are the global experts in customer success and software adoption. We're focused on delivering training and consulting services to close that value gap and ensure that both SaaS buyers and providers are successful in achieving their desired business outcomes from software. And what makes us unique is that we not only work with SaaS providers, we also work with buyers of software, and we know very well what it takes to make them successful in adopting software. So a couple of housekeeping items before we get started. The webinar is being recorded, and the recording will be available on our website at tritons.com on our resources page. And we encourage you to type your questions in the Q&A box throughout the webinar. You don't need to wait until the end. We do try to keep it pretty tight and focused to 30 minutes so that we have plenty of time to answer your questions at the end. And so now we'll introduce the presenters. We'll start with Jason.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. My name is Jason Whitehead. I'm the founder and CEO of Tritons. Just a little bit about my background. I spent over 20 years working in software implementations and spent probably the last 18 to 20 years focusing just on how to really make sure that once the system's live, that you're getting adoption and success and the business outcomes that you want. So I've learned a lot about what works both from the technical side, but also from the organizational, behavioral, and adoption side, and really looking forward to sharing with you guys today.
Great. And I'm Jen MacLean-Rogan. I'm the Vice President of Client Success here at Tritons. And I have 20 years of experience in IT, software adoption, and customer success. My background is in business management and organizational development, which has served me really well in helping people incorporate new technology into their daily routines and, more importantly, get the value out of that technology so that they can achieve their individual and organizational goals. And what we hope to achieve, our objectives for this webinar, are for you to learn how to help your customers achieve their desired business outcomes from use of your products, features, and functionality. And our goal here is to give you a new tactic or tool for engaging your customers and proactively guiding them towards success with your product, which is our three-step process for accelerating customer success. We're also going to talk about some of the common mistakes that we see CS teams making that are actually working against the revenue and renewal goals. So we'll be bringing that up throughout the webinar as well.
Great, thanks, Jen. So, and like Jen said, we try to keep these pretty tight to about 30 minutes, including some time for Q&A. But what we wanted to do before we get into the tactic is just to create a little context for you and try and help make this make sense a little bit. So, one of the things that we find is that when we work with SaaS buyers and SaaS vendors, they're all looking for the same thing, which is to improve their own organization's goals and performance. Both parties are really hoping that your software is going to get that outcome for them. On the SaaS side, this usually looks like increased renewals, increased satisfaction, increased referrals, and reduced churn, and really expanding accounts. And that's sort of what you're hoping for and what success looks like. But then on the buyer side, it's a little bit different. What they're looking to do is solve a different type of business problem that's specific to their organization. So maybe they're trying to increase efficiency or improve quality or improve customer satisfaction. And what they're looking to do is solve some sort of internal operational problem and improve internal performance using your tool. And that can be at the corporate level, it can be in a department level, even down at a frontline team and staff level. But what really is the important thing here is that as a vendor, you're never going to be successful unless your buyers are successful in achieving their business outcomes. And the challenge here is, a lot of buyers, they're not really sure how to get there, and they usually look for some traditional change management approaches to really drive adoption and value, and they typically don't work that well. So one of the big issues here that we find is that while many of your customers and the buyers of software, they're really good at getting systems live and configuring them and adjusting their processes on paper, they're not really good at typically making sure that after a system's live, that they get the value from it, that they get people to adopt it. And that's really the whole reason that most organizations are investing in customer success, is because their customers are not able to be successful driving value in their own organization on their own, and they're looking for help. When we work with a lot of organizations, they typically say, oh, we just need some change management, and we need some communications and training. And the challenge there is that a lot of change management tactics and techniques are not appropriate and not effective for driving adoption for SaaS products. A lot of change management techniques are really focused on a go-live area and making sure that you go from one static state of what was it like before we had the software into another static state of what's it like now that we have this new software. And the challenge is your customers' organizations are not static. They're constantly changing. They're fluid. They're evolving all the time. New people are coming in. New people are going out. Processes are changing. The environment is changing. And if you really have a change management approach that's just focused on going to that point and go live, you're going to quickly be disappointed in the results, because your situation will continue to move on and you will not have kept pace. So that's just sort of some context of really why we want to talk about this and why it's so important, and to really help you identify some other ways to approach it that you can help your customers with.
And it's important to remember that your software's features and functionality alone can't improve your customers' performance and guarantee their desired business outcomes. The reason for that is that there's human engagement that's necessary with your software in order to get the value out of it, which is what makes improving organizational performance so difficult. And an all too common mistake that we often see SaaS providers make is really trying to sell the benefits of the software's features and functionality and assume that your customers will want to use it and know when and how to use it. And this is commonly known as a what's in it for me or with a message. And unfortunately, this one size fits all with a message on features and benefits doesn't cut it. You know, for example, we just had a client recently who was telling us a story about how they went to great lengths to tout the benefits of the features and functionalities of a new system that they were implementing. And when the system went live and the reality set in that the end user's job functions and their routine behaviors needed to change to actually experience those benefits, the users were really upset and they lost their trust, they lost their support. And of course, this is not what you want to have happen with your SaaS customers.
Yeah, and in that particular case as well too, as a result of the approach that they took, which made a lot of sense on paper and is something they've done for years and years, it ended up actually adding cost and time to it. They had to greatly extend the deadline for completing that rollout and had a lot of additional costs in it, simply because they used the wrong approach.
So it's really important to understand that a big part of users adopting and getting value from software's features and functionality is users need to know exactly what is expected of them going forward with the new technology. For example, what do they need to know, or they need to know what they're supposed to do with it while performing their daily functions and when to use the technology. And most SaaS providers don't help their customers figure this out before go live. And as a result, they suffer, and their customers suffer, from the uncertainty and confusion about how to incorporate that software into their daily routines, which of course we all know leads to poor adoption and ultimately customer churn.
Right. So one of the things that we really want to highlight here that we see time and time again, and we've alluded to it now, is being explicit about the performance behaviors that you expect of your users after go live. It is pretty critical. And it's typically missed, which is very interesting. And when we look at the way that people approach training and reinforcement and all these things, you see some pretty big gaps here. You know, one of the things that we typically see is that people will often provide a one-off training right around go live on the features and benefits of the software and how to navigate the application. And you know how to point and click and where to go through. But what they don't really talk about as much is really, so now how does this change your job and what do we expect you to do differently going forward? And there's an assumption that people will instinctively and intuitively make this leap from knowing and understanding how to navigate a product because they've done it once in a training class to, I'm going to repeat this behavior day in and day out on my own for the rest of my working days going forward. And we also make a big distinction here around what we call big T and little t training. And really that little t is really training is education. We've trained them on how to navigate the product. We've trained them on how to point and click and what that needs to look like. And big T is more training is reinforcement. Training is conditioning, sort of like you do with athletes that are training for a big race, or animals where you're trying to change their behavior and you reward them with treats when they behave the right way, and you do other negative stimuli when they don't. So flipping your model and saying, how do we do more performance-based training and behavior-based training and applying those techniques is pretty key. Really, so when you look at this and you start to think through all of that, the other piece that's sort of related to this that's typically missed is asking for the behavior that you want and being very explicit about it to the point that end users can say, I know what's expected of me. I know what I need to do to be successful in my job going forward using this software, using this application, as opposed to here's how you point and click, and really getting to that level of explicitness. And when you look at this, for some organizations, for some applications, the changes are very significant, and it's big changes to what their job was beforehand. It's big, very disruptive to who does what and where it needs to go. In other applications, it's relatively small and minor, but it still needs to be stated what's expected. We'll come back to that example a little bit later here, so moving on. One other thing to keep in mind too is being explicit about the behaviors that have to happen outside the system. So for example, if you're an executive, what is it that you're supposed to do to create the conditions in which people will adopt the technology? If you're a manager, what do you need to do to review how people are using software and to make sure they're delivering, performing it, their jobs using it as designed and intended? And how do you as a manager then reward them or hold them accountable if they're not doing it the right way? So those are examples of manager and executive behaviors that may need to be explicitly stated so that they know what to do, even though it may not require them to go into the system.
Okay, so now that you understand the importance of identifying performance behaviors, here's our proven three-step process for accelerating customer success. And step one is taking the time, this is really important, to define your customers' desired business outcomes from using your software. Identifying a clear definition of what success looks like to your customers and what those desired business outcomes are from use of your software is really, really key to accelerating your customers' success. In fact, here are some examples of questions that we ask our customers, which include, why did you buy our product? What organizational challenges are you trying to overcome? And what are you hoping to achieve with our product? Another really key question that we ask is, what does success look like for you 1, 3, 5 years post go live? And what will your renewal decisions be based on, so that we know what do we need to proactively help them achieve? And making sure that you revisit their answers to these questions during your interactions with your customers is really important. This should serve as a reference for everything you do with them. If you're putting your focus or efforts into things that aren't going to lead them to those business outcomes, then you need to rethink that. And making sure that you're focused on their answers will also help you become that trusted strategic advisor that your customers really do need throughout their relationship with your product and your company. And then step two is, once you know those desired business outcomes, it's linking your software's features and functionality to those outcomes. And this step really involves thinking through what features or modules within your software would help your customers the most based on what, again, success looks like for them. You should even prioritize which functionality they should focus on first to achieve value as quickly as possible. And then step three is linking performance behaviors, which you've been talking about, to your software's features and functionality. And this step, of course, involves determining exactly what your customers at all levels within their organization need to do within the system as well as outside of the system. And Jason gave us some examples of that in the previous slide. What do they need to do to get the value out of your software using those features and functionality? And you should even help your customers set performance targets as well as identify consequences for missing, meeting, or exceeding performance targets, and also to help them hold people accountable for using and adopting the features and functionality. And all of this may sound like common sense, but very few SaaS providers are actually doing this and getting to this level of detail with their customers. And instead, they're really just hoping that the customers will do it on their own. But in reality, most don't do this. We've worked with a lot of them, and nobody's ever done this. So it's really important to help them figure this out sooner rather than later. So we're going to go through an example of this three-step process so that you can see how you could help your customers do this with your software.
You know, and I think another important point, when we've been training some buyers of software on multiple occasions with different organizations, we say, you know, what is the business outcome that you want and how do you communicate that out to your end users? And typically, they're like, we've never done that. It boggles the mind. And they're like, we really should. We never thought to do that. And this is especially true if a lot of the people that are guiding and leading the implementation are in the IT team and not on the business side, that they're much more, here's the features, here's the process, here's the training. We've delivered a system to you. But so the IT groups, they've done what's typically been their role and what's been asked of them. But what the organization is really looking to do is solve a business problem. And they have not typically made that explicit link between the two. So let's jump into a three-step example. In this case, we're going to be talking about CRM software. Because most of us have used CRMs. I've spent most of my career implementing them. It's really interesting how they work there. So really, what are some of the customer's business outcomes and values? And this is the type of thing that I've seen either in RFP situations or even on vendor websites, but they're like, these are the types of business outcomes you can expect. And many customers that we've worked with, when they're purchasing CRMs, are like, well, we want to improve our sales forecasting because we need better capacity planning. We need to make sure we have enough support people. We need to make sure we can build and ship product on time and where we need to go, but we need a forecast that's accurate and not just fantasy land. How do we do that? So the blue line is really more of a sales track. And this white line might be if we're working with a customer support group. We also want to make sure that as a business outcome that we have, you know, accurate customer data so that we can do analytics. Who are our best customers? Who are our worst customers? How do we predict churn? Where do we need to address things differently? What does that need to look like? So we get a lot of organizations that they really want to have this rich data and insight and analytics, and yet their data is usually at such a poor quality level that they can't meaningfully and reliably use it for analysis. So starting here with what's the end in mind and the outcome, then we go, well, how do we come back a little bit more and say, well, what features and functions of the software are going to get us there? And in the case of a sales forecast, it might be, okay, you've got our contacts and account and opportunity modules. You know, and the opportunity module typically has some sort of forecasting functionality in it, or maybe a separate one. We need to know a little bit about what product. So all of that functionality should be there. We just need to get the sales guys to use it. Wouldn't that be great? And then for the customer service one, we might say, oh, we need to use our service request module. We need to do some knowledge base or solution capturing and get things up on an online website as well so people can do that. Oh, and we also need to validate our contact information to make sure we're talking to the right people and that we're solving the right problems based on the product they've actually purchased. Some organizations don't even do this, and yet some do at a high level, but it doesn't typically get communicated out to the end users in a way that says, this is what we're trying to achieve, so these are the changes we expect in how you perform your job. So now let's talk about how we can make this a little bit more explicit. So let's talk about, you know, who has to use this, which end users need to use this, and how do you make it explicit to their job? So we say sales is going to enter all this information when they're conducting calls and they're mapping, you know, doing the initial phone calls. Support may need to be doing this. And some folks may say, well, you know, we typically do that in process mapping activities, and many times that is true. But oftentimes what they don't do is then link it and say, and here's what the behavioral expectations are for you day in and day out when you're doing your job. On every single call, we want to make sure that you've done this. We need to make sure it's accurate and complete. Another example to get even more detailed, when entering service tickets, make sure you put enough information in the system to the point that anyone can pick up this ticket 6 months from now and have enough information that they can understand the customer situation and how we service them and how we delighted them without having to speak to you. And that's one of those items that comes back and says, do we have the history we need of customer interactions? If the individual who took care of this action left the organization, can we continue on? Can we continue to delight them? Okay, so we're getting a little bit richer and saying, okay, so we know we need to do this in a process. So now what do we need to get to from a performance and behavioral target? And this is really getting explicit to the point that people can say in a yes or no area, do I know what's expected of me and can I deliver it to it? So with the sales folks, it might be, you've got a 3-month window here for a learning curve, and at the end of 3 months, we expect to have at least 90% of customer contact fields are accurately populated. You know what's expected. We've identified the fields, we identified when you need to use it, we've identified what it means to be correct, and we'll give you a 3-month window to get there. And similarly with customer support, maybe it's hey, within 1 month, we want to have all the key contact records validated every time you have a call, and we want to have everything detailed at such a fine level that we can pick it up in 6 months. This is getting to the point that you now have a performance target that you can come back to your end users and say, did you do this, yes or no? And as the manager and supervisor, you can say, it is my job to come back and check to make sure that we're achieving these performance targets. Are we doing it, yes or no? As an executive, you can come back and look across your organization and say, why is this department or division achieving these targets, but why is someone else not achieving them? There may be areas in here, depending on your organization, that you drill down to the point of actually saying a specific metric that you will use to measure it and how you will report that. We didn't want to overcomplicate it for this example. But even just getting to this level and asking for the behavior that you want, say, now you know what's going to get in your way and what can we do to make this easier, helps take away some of those defensive nature of end users and some of the excuses, because it's very clear and explicit what it is that's expected of them. And then the final step here is, okay, now we actually go through and say, how do we both reward and recognize people for doing great, for meeting our targets or exceeding them? And then if they are not doing them, how do we hold them accountable? What's the consequence in here? Some organizations do this strictly as a financial piece, but that's not always the case. You can do this in terms of being eligible for promotion. You can turn in case of being eligible for other benefits. You can do this even to the point of if someone is not following their performance target by a certain point in time, you could handle that like you would any other performance management issue where someone's not doing their job because you've officially changed their job. So you start to do performance improvement plans or go through whatever HR processes in your organization. But the point is, you need to come through and explicitly link some sort of a reward and consequence, some sort of motivator to the behaviors that you want. And you then need to make sure that someone's actually coming through and measuring and monitoring all these accountable. Pretty clear example, very powerful, very rarely done, and really should be. But also I wanted to remind you of something that Jen said, which is making sure too that managers are doing this and that managers understand their job may not be to enter the data in the system, but their job may be every week on Thursdays, we want you to come and review the performance of your team in the system and identify what's working and what's not. And every Friday, meet with your team to review this performance, to hold them accountable, to gather feedback and input to figure out what needs to change or where they need to go. But basically managing the performance of your team, which is the role of a manager. So when we look at this mapping, what this also allows us to do is to understand how big of an impact it's having on someone's job and how big of a change and shift that you're looking for. And what's important to recognize is for some organizations, in some software, you're making minor changes to people's jobs and roles. But in other organizations, depending on the software, you're going to make some pretty big shifts. And you're asking them to do things differently and spend a lot more of their time doing things they may not have done before, as well as making sure that they're using the technology in a way that enables other people to do their job and to collaborate effectively, which is so critical in the digital workplace. So you need to look at all the other elements that will affect that over the long term. So have we changed jobs so much that the position descriptions are no longer correct? Are the employee performance reviews process or criteria no longer correct because we've changed how we expect people to behave and what their job is? Do we need to adjust career plans? Do we need to adjust HR succession plans? Those type of things. And one of the big pieces here also is coming back to what Jen said of what is success 1, 3, and 5 years down the road. If you're expecting big shifts in performance and big shifts in behavior, how do you make sure that over that 3 to 5 year time frame that new employees coming on will get up to speed quickly and then you'll onboard them the correct way and get them quickly delivering and performing in a way that is successful for you and for the organization and for them as an individual. So wanted to just quickly touch on here that there's a big link of all this behavior and performance criteria to HR. So if you don't typically involve your HR group, you should definitely consult with them and see how they can help. Okay.
Okay. And then this next piece, we've mentioned before that the key success factor for mapping these performance behaviors and helping your customers achieve their desired business outcomes is focusing on your customers, managers, and immediate supervisor, because they are the biggest drivers of adoption and success with your product. So make sure that you're engaging them early on prior to go live, and that you're coaching them on how to drive adoption, because most won't know how to do that. We actually spend a great deal of our time with managers and supervisors and helping them understand how to clearly communicate those performance expectations, how to set performance goals, may even include weekly assignments for end users, as well as how to monitor and measure the results, and how to hold themselves and their team members accountable for incorporating that software into their daily routines and getting results. So just keep in mind, your customers will not naturally go to that level of detail, so you will need to help them. You will need to educate your customers on how to do this. And if you're not an expert in driving adoption to get better results for you and your customers, we can certainly help with that. It does take some time and experience to know what to look for, what to listen for, to proactively identify where they might be struggling due to organizational issues rather than your product's features and functionality.
Absolutely. And one of the other things, too, to think about as you go through this behavior mapping process and linking business outcomes and features and behaviors all together, for a customer success vendor, this is a great thing that you should start to do early in the relationship, to have that discussion on business value and shift them away from the features and functions of the product. And many times new clients are so focused on just getting the system live that they will skip this, and that is a dangerous thing. But then once you have these maps written out and you start sharing them with users and managers, what you also can do is come back and use them during your executive business reviews and quarterly business reviews to come in and say, how we had mapped out a plan of the outcomes that you wanted to the behaviors that you needed to get there using the system. How are you doing against that? What are the actual levels of behavior that you're getting, the actual behaviors? Are you getting the adoption pieces that you need to achieve these outcomes? And basically, that allows you to have continued business discussions and business outcome discussions with your customers, and a chance to really talk about, to Jen's point of mapping this back to renewal criteria and how are we doing, so that you're not surprised when it comes to renewal time. But also what it allows you to do, which is absolutely key, is it allows you to, in a non-defensive, non-confrontational way, highlight to your customer that the challenges that they're having are most likely more about the way they are managing and driving adoption within their organization and less about your product. And it really helps shift them from focusing on how to change the product or blame the product to what do we do to drive adoption internally? What can we be doing differently that will actually solve our problem? So it's a huge, huge win for being able to refocus them where they need to spend the most work and get them to stop being focused on a product issue that is probably more perceived than real. Okay.
Okay, so now we're going to head into the question and answers section of our webinar. And we did have 4 questions that were submitted prior to the webinar, so we want to make sure that we answer those, and thank you for submitting those. So the first...
So before we do, if you have additional questions that you want to type into the Q&A box now, please go ahead and enter them now, and we will get to those as soon as we go through the 4 that we received in advance.
Great. So the first one is suggestions for improvements on operations without losing quality are welcome. How to continuously provide value for customers after adoption. So hopefully, after this webinar, you'll use this 3-step process as sort of your guide for how you can help them after go live, as well as before and during go live. So making sure that post go live that you're still continuing those conversations, that you're still interacting with your customers about their desired business outcomes and how they're setting those performance behaviors, how are they monitoring and measuring them, and how are they holding people accountable. Those are all things that you should continue to do post go live, especially as your customer's environment changes, your software's features and functionality will probably change over time. All of those factors really require that you continue to engage with your customers over the life of the system, or as long as they are one of your customers. So maybe the level of effort might get smaller as time goes on versus right at go live when things are pretty stressed and there's a lot of things going on. So maybe thinking about how to evolve year after year your effort and your engagement with your customers.
Yeah, I think that's so key. Like we said, if in the ideal world, you will incorporate this process mapping, outcome process, behavior mapping into work you do at the start of an engagement, even before they're live. And then hopefully you will go through and continue this, to Jen's point, year over year to make sure that things are still relevant. The other thing that you can do that I think is also important is we talked about the links to HR and future onboarding processes for new employees. So many organizations make the mistake of just training and onboarding current staff that they forget that they will continue to have changes and turnover in staff going forward. How to make sure that new people coming in get up to speed, and as the system and processes evolve, that they're getting the latest and greatest information that's accurate. So really, that's a great way to add value to your client, is making sure that you're focused on their continued success once the product is stable.
Yeah. So the second question is, how can we learn of business outcomes with our clients when they're not transparent or don't want to give us that information? Have you tried any additional strategies that have worked?
Yep, so there's a lot of things that you can do, and one of the things I would clarify right up front would be to ask, when you talk about your client, are you talking about just like your executive sponsor and the proof, the point of contact that you have? Or you're actually talking about the end users directly. One of the things that we have definitely found is that there are ways that you can go and get end users to tell you what value they're creating, what their success is. One example is we worked with one of our SaaS vendors, or client of ours is a SaaS vendor, and helped them develop a process by capturing success stories from end users. And in this case, it was financial advisors using financial advising software. And we structured a program where they could submit in their success stories to identify what was the business challenge they did, what was the financial impact and the value to the organization, which modules of the software they used, and the impact it had. And they had multiple submissions where people would come through and said, I won a $5,000 deal through a 1-hour meeting I never would have had before this. I saved X amount of time, I was able to upgrade this. And they were able to quantify financially the estimated impact. They were able to link it to the software. It was very, very impactful. And then we helped our client, the SaaS vendor, go through and say, now here's how you can package this information up and use it with your customer and during your business reviews to show the impact that you're having, not just point clicks and records created, but business impact as told by their users. As well as being able to then link this into onboarding of new staff members to show, here's the business impact that is possible and that we would like to have. Let's go ahead and map out the behaviors that will get you here using it yourself.
Great. And our third question is, could you please explain the difference between using your 3-step process with a small, medium enterprise customer compared to a big enterprise customer, if you would recommend carrying out the process differently?
Yeah, so I think depending where you are, like the process that we share today, I think what's really important here is that the process is the same regardless of the size of the organization. You want to map out the business outcomes that they want with the features and functions, with the behaviors that will get you there. What's different is how you go about doing that for the different organizations. So with a small, medium-sized organization that might be more of a low-touch customer, you probably need to be a bit more prescriptive, sort of say, for the majority of our customers, these are the value that they're looking to get, and here's how they get there, and give them some pretty concrete examples and suggested maps for them. You could even go so far as to do some sort of webinar training, or at a customer review, getting multiple customers on to help walk them through that process where you can teach them to do it for themselves, but you've given them pretty much a lot of it canned and ready to go out of the chute. For your enterprise customers, where they probably have customized software, they may have complex business needs, they may have complex workflows, you may need to actually go in and help them do this mapping for them, or facilitate and teaching them hands-on and helping them create custom maps specific to their business goals and their business processes and needs, so that it's real and relevant. Because if it's not real and relevant to them, it won't be as impactful as you want to. So that's pretty much what I would say is the process, the mapping is the same, but be more prescriptive in giving it to them, someone, versus customizing for the larger customers because of the size of the impact.
Great. The fourth question is, please can you talk about the correlation between adoption and value ROI? Too many CSMs and CSM teams talk about adoption without really understanding the relevance and importance for customers. Do they care if they use the software if it isn't helping them achieve their business goals? Adoption is great, but value is better. And I love this question because we often say this with our customers. and internally that adoption is not the end goal, but it is the critical path to get to the end goal, which is the value from your customer's perspective. It's the desired business outcome that your customers want. That's the end goal. But without adoption, it's really hard to get there. We need to make sure that people are using the system, your software, as designed, as intended, in order to get the value out of that software. So there's really the distinction: is adoption is the critical path to the end goal, which is value and business outcome.
Yeah, and I think one of the things, when I was speaking at the Customer Success Conference in London back in April, there was a presenter there, a man named Adam Joseph, wrote a great article on watermelon customers, where he basically, they show up green on the outside, and just looking at the metrics and the usage data, they appeared to have very high adoption, but when you actually spoke to them, they were not getting that business value, or another alternative came up at a better, cheaper rate that could provide the same value. So they actually were prepared to churn. They were red on the inside. So this whole idea of a watermelon customer, that if you just look at adoption metrics and numbers and process, but without looking at that underlying value, you could be in for some big surprises and you can still get churned. So being really focused on what it is and being explicit about the value and linking that to renewal is key.
Great. So looks like we have a question submitted here, and I'm gonna read this out loud, which says, I would like to know what would be the customer success practices you suggest for the project managers when they are implementing a product, which as a result will generate recurring revenues to the company, which is heavily dependent from the project implementation.
Okay, so let me make sure I understand. So it sounds like you've got project managers who are implementing a product that will generate recurring revenue to the company, but it's heavily dependent on the project implementation. So I think there's, if I'm understanding this correctly, it's basically, there's a huge need to get the implementation right to get the recurring revenue, but what do you do then? And what is the project manager's role? I think that's what we're asking here. I think part of this comes down to, as a project manager, how do you make sure that you're balancing both tracks of the technical, getting the system live and generating those revenues, versus sustaining them and doing the adoption activities in parallel that need to be done to prepare it. So we've actually worked with one organization that they realized that they needed to focus on adoption. It was 80% of their need, and they started their adoption track a good 6 to 9 months before they actually selected the vendor and the technology, because they realized getting the system live without a plan for getting value out of it and helping people from day one is critical. So what I would suggest here is, where the recurring revenues and you've got to get the implementation right, getting a system live without getting the value down the road is going to be problematic. You've got to do both in parallel and make sure you're focused there. The other piece is that you've really got a critical critical window when the system first goes live, where people will give you some grace and people are going to learn their new habits. You can either be directive and manage those so they just create the habits that you want them to have and the behaviors you want, or left to their own devices, they'll do what they need to do, and then you'll probably be in a rescue situation pretty quickly where they may not get where you need to go. We've had a couple of clients come to us where they got the system live and they got the implementation done 2 years ago, but they never got that value that they wanted from it. They never got the outcomes, and then they were like, what do we need to do? What's the problem? And how do we come and do that? So then they're playing catch up, having already made a big multi-million-dollar investment. It's pretty key. But in general, what I would do is come back and say is that project managers, executive sponsors, anyone who are going to be leading these projects, they need to understand what are the issues that will affect adoption behavior change as it relates to that business revenue and that value, and really be able to make an integrated plan that says these are the dependencies between the two. We can't focus just on getting it live. We can't focus just on the implementation. Here's where it breaks down. And one of the things that you might do would say, when do we expect to get this business value? If it's 2 years down the road, if the outcome and the revenues are expected 2 years after go live, then from the very beginning, do a project plan that continues from the point of go live right through 2 years after go live. Look at the activities that need to happen from go live right up through those areas. What are the checkpoints you need to have? Where do you need to be doing lessons learned? Where do you need to be onboarding new people? But more importantly, once you've sort of mapped that out and you realize that there's a huge dependency about what happens after the implementation, look at, okay, we're going to have all these activities, and all these efforts after go live to make sure we get the value that we want, what do we need to do before go live to prepare for that? What do we need to do during development and parallel to the implementation to make sure that at the point of go live forward, we're going to hit the marks and the milestones that we need to get the outcome. So anyway, I hope that was helpful. It was a bit of a long answer, but I'm happy to talk with anyone about this in more in depth, and happy to get on a quick call. If you would like to know anything, just reach out to us. I think that's all we have time for today, so I'd very much like to thank everyone for being with us. Just to let you know a little bit more of some other activities here.
Yeah, we encourage you to check out our website at tritons.com and take a look at our private workshops and training programs that we have available. They're very flexible, they're very fast, focused, and affordable. And we're also happy to announce that we're hosting a virtual software adoption training starting on July 7th I think it's July 10th. July 10th through August 7th, in which it's open to anyone, anywhere in the world, and it really is an easy way to incorporate some new learnings on a weekly basis. It's about 2 hours of time. We're going to be doing a live instructor-led training session to accompany some online training courses that you can take when and where it's convenient for you. So if you're looking for some information, more information on how to drive software adoption, really we'd encourage you to attend that. We're looking forward to it. Again, that starts on July 10th.
Yep. And also, we invite you to join us coming up on June 27th for another webinar where I will be presenting with Neil Marcus from the Insights Association, and we're going to be talking about how to turn insights into business outcomes. A lot of organizations spend a lot of time and effort doing data collection, analytics, and research, and market research, and those kind of things, and they can get some great ahas, but then they don't actually close loop and turn them into actions and business outcomes. And we'll be talking a bit more about how to do that and incorporate some of the practices from customer success to achieve business value. So thank you very much for joining us today. We hope you found this helpful, and we invite you to come back and join us for a future webinar. And if there's other folks that you think would find this useful, please be sure and share the information in the webinar replay with them. We thank you for your time.
Thanks.